With Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning right around the corner, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to listen to our reviews of past missions right here, right now on Spoiler Alert. Welcome back to Spoiler Alert. Evan and I are here again, ready to watch Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, but not quite, because we still have a few movies to review, which is why you're here. I know, right? But this week, I'm glad you joined us because we are reviewing some of my personal favorite movies from my personal favorite franchise. And so we're here to review Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, and Mission Impossible: Fallout before we finally review Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning in our next episode. I am so pumped.
I couldn't be more excited. I mean, we're days away, and every
Literal
day,
days.
literally since we hit the exact a week from right now, we would be waking up talking about it.
Yeah,
I think since then we've been like, can we just call out of work? Can we just keep going?
We've had our tickets for a month now, and we are.
Oh my gosh!
Oh man, I couldn't
be more anticipated.
Perfect
for a
seats
film.
in a nice big IMAX theater. I am so pumped.
Next to F1,
to see
this is up there.
Definitely am. I mean, this is my number one most anticipated movie of the year. And rewatching the Mission Impossibles going back to last week has just been a very fun rewatch because I mean I love them. I watch them usually once a year. But
once a year?
I know, right? But it's been really fun to just go back and revisit what made these movies great, why it's such a fun franchise, and then just to see, what the franchise is building to with the Final Reckoning. So with that said, let's dive right in. Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. I mean, first off, if you haven't watched our review of the first three Mission Impossibles, highly recommend you do that and let us know in the comments what you thought of those first three missions, because they had their highs and their lows. Mission 2, that'd be a low.
Number 2 was definitely.
But the others were good. But if you already watched that, then you're ready for us to give you the full rundown on Mission Impossible 4, 5, and 6. So let's start with Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. So this movie came at an interesting time because a lot of people thought that the Mission Impossible franchise was kind of going to die after MI3.
Mm-hmm. It kind of closed. I mean, they left it a little bit more on the closed side of things.
Right. The end,
where they could have just been like,
he goes off with his wife. But then not only that, but then on the production side of things, was when Mission Impossible 3 released, that was kind of at the height of Tom Cruise's bad public image type of thing, where he was very open about Scientology and all that. And so people had a bad image of him, which image people still hold to this day. There's a lot of people who don't like Tom Cruise for that reason. Yeah. But around the time of Ghost Protocol is when he completely rebuilt his entire public image. And this movie was the face of that because he built himself. After this, he got a lot quieter about his own personal beliefs, and he just became a lot more vocal about making movies and just talking about movies.
Yeah, that's all he cares about.
Movies.
That's all he's ever wanted.
And Ghost Protocol is really at the front of that, especially because this is what really sparked the stunt work.
I was going to say this was. I know that they were planning on it from the beginning, but they made such a big entrance into the Mission Impossible franchise again with such a legendary stunt with climbing literally the tallest building in the world that it was just like, okay, now you have to see this. They really went above and beyond for it.
And it's crazy the behind the scenes things that went into just actually
it's so cool.
doing it in real life.
It's really cool.
And it looks absolutely freaking incrable.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to see, but it's so cool.
You can tell 100% that was not a green screen. This was the real deal. And it looks incredible. So Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol is directed by Brad Bird. Came out in 2011. This movie is almost 15 years old.
That's crazy.
Which is crazy because I think it's aged very well. I think it, for the most part, there's not really anything that looks dated on it.
Yeah.
And this movie is, again, as with all the Mission Impossibles, they seem to get better with each installment. But this movie, the plot here follows, obviously, Ethan Hunt, right? But this time he's given a mission to stop a Russian who is said to be kind of a fanatic and has plans to start a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. Yeah. So the thing too about this movie is one of the things it did is really elevate the scales or the
the from
threat of what.
Yeah, from just like, hey, it's kind of your regular bad guys to like, this guy wants to create total nuclear war between two sides that it would almost.
And so, because you look at the first movie, right? It's just a mole hunt, right? Someone framed Ethan Hunt. He's really just trying to clear his name. That's all he's really trying to do. Then MI2 has a little bit higher stakes where it had the virus, but it didn't feel as tangible, I don't think, just because they didn't really show the widespread effects of that. They did in a few scenes, but
yeah.
And then Mission 3, you don't really know what the stakes are because they never explain what the rabbit's foot is.
Which I think is kind of cool. And we talked about our little fun theory about that. And everything.
We'll see on Thursday.
Who knows?
We'll see.
But yeah, they took a little bit more of a serious approach. And I feel like it was very fitting, especially with they kind of had to come back into this field and really say like, hey, we're coming with the hammer full swinging. Like with the stunt work, the actors and everything, they really went above and beyond. And I mean, they kind of had to, which was awesome.
Can tell because they really did just after 3, even though I love 3, they really put the stamp on what Mission Impossible is with Ghost Protocol. They added a lot more comedic elements, but not like over the top Marvel type of comedy, but just
it was still engaging that people could just have like a subtle laugh and chuckle. Yeah.
And they really just kind of took some of the formulaic elements in MI3, like the globe trotting, the idea of, 3 major sequences taking place in 3 different locations. That kind of formula they took from MI3 and I think improved it here. And so all that said, let's just dive right in. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. We both just recently rewatched them. So Evan, give me what are some highlights of this movie? What are some reasons why people should rewatch this movie before they go see The Final Reckoning in theaters?
I mean, this I feel like was a really good staple on kind of how the next few movies were going to look. I mean, right, we talked about it, from 1 to 2 to 3, they were kind of still figuring out their rhythm. And this one was a really good change of how they were like, hey, this is how I really want this kind of next series to come. We'll, of course, talk about 5 and the importance of that one as well. But 4 was really this, I mean, they were entering into this kind of different age of, technology, threats, making it a little bit more modern. I also did like how they did bring a few bigger A-list actors that we kind of see, and that also attracted a bigger audience. Jeremy Renner,
exactly.
Of course.
And then you bring back Simon Pegg, who lost a ton of weight here. Like, when you watch it from MI3
or from 3, it was cool.
From 3 to Ghost Protocol, he lost a ton of weight.
And then, what else am I thinking of?
They also brought in Tom Wilkinson as the secretary with just a short scene.
But the point is they brought in a lot kind of familiar faces that you kind of know that it's going to be a bit
when
more
you
of
watch
a well-done
3 to this one, it felt like they definitely wanted to go bigger in scale,
which they did,
and they did. And I think the highlight of that is absolutely the Burj Khalifa sequence, because
that's what the movie was
that scene is, I think, one of the most well-written scenes I've ever watched, just in the way that the scene is constructed. Because this movie as a whole is written on the basis that the mission fails, that everything is going to fail, and they have to improvise.
There was the scene where they're in the Burj Khalifa, and Ethan's trying to think of a different route or an alternative, and every corner and every idea that he comes up with, they keep shutting him down. And then finally they were like, okay, well, what's the only reason? And he's like, well, you got to climb it. And he's like, all right, fine.
And that's just the way that the whole sequence is built, right? They start the sequence of saying, okay, we got to give Hendrix fake, or I guess Winstrom is the person who shows up to the Burj Khalifa, but he says, we got to give him fake nuclear launch codes, then follow him to Hendrix, who we're going to apprehend, right? But then first problem, because their plan is they're going to do a building lift, essentially, a facelift to the Burj Khalifa.
So almost as if there were the exact same room just twice. So that
convincing him that him and the buyer and the seller of the launch codes, the nuclear launch codes, that they had a meeting that never took place, right? Yeah. So that's the premise. But their first problem comes up with, we can't actually get into the server room to access the things we need to be able to do that. So then what do? You have to climb the building. Okay, well, next problem, we can't get back down because the elevators are locked from the inside. So now you got to jump back out of the building. Next problem, Winston was actually bringing someone with him who could validate the launch codes. Okay, so what do we have to do? That means we have to have someone else to come with us, and we have to validate active nuclear launch codes and give them to the person.
Most of the movie was like that, which I enjoyed, where it took that aspect of seeing how really smart they were, where they had to think on their
right,
feet.
right.
Because the whole point of the movie is the mission. If you choose to accept it, then something goes wrong, and then they kind of have to backtrack and figure it out. But I mean, it was to a different scale where they really were on a dead end at almost every corner, and then they just
the
keep
whole entire story is built on improvisation.
Yeah,
they have to improvise at every corner, and I think that's one of the things that really makes this movie work well, is because it keeps you on the edge of your seat, even in a sequence like the Burj Khalifa, where there's not that much action per se, but it's in a way where you are engaged because the audience or the characters have to keep evolving what they're going to do. They have to keep planning, coming up with plan B, and then it usually doesn't work until the very end when finally they do end up stopping the launch of a nuke. But it's a fun way that they built that sequence that makes it so iconic. It makes it so memorable. What are some of your other pros that you'd give for this movie?
I mean, we talk about it with all of them, right? But they always kind of tweak and change the score and the music. It was just fitting, right? We hear the kind of basic similar soundtrack that we always do, but with little bits and elements to it, which I really enjoyed. I mean, there's really not much to complain about other than that. It's a great film, and I really liked Ghost Protocol. This was one of the few that I saw before everything else, just because I was younger and I was introduced to
actually, I saw this
Mission
movie
Impossible
without having seen Mission 2 or Mission 3 because I was always told they were bad, like they sucked.
2 and 3?
And 2 did suck.
2 was...
But 3, I don't know why I was always told that, but like, that movie sucks. But no, that movie's great. It's a great movie. So I saw this movie without having seen the second or the third one. And obviously spoiler alert because that's the name of the channel. But by the end of the movie, when you see Julia show up, you're like... I mean, if you've never seen 3, you're like, okay, what?
Yeah, you're like, who is this again?
And so another sequence that I really like in this movie is the Kremlin scene. And it
was really well done, and they didn't have to do a lot of there wasn't a script to it. I mean, the whole point of it was for them to be quiet, but it was just so well done, like timing and just the creativity of it, that they didn't talk during the entire scene. For most all of the entire Kremlin sequence. They were just silent. So
something again, I've watched some of the episodes of the original TV show, and when you watch them, you see them adapt certain things from the TV show into the movies. And one of the things they do is in the Kremlin scene when they put up that big screen to
mirror his eyesight so he could.
So that they did something very similar in the TV show, albeit it's a 1960s type of technology where they just put like a picture in front of a camera to make people think that what was going on wasn't really going on. Yeah. And so it's really cool to see them adapt a strategy from
what
the original.
That was like, but now just take it to the more modern
aspect. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's really cool to see
technology now, but that's fun.
And so, but then I really like when the kind of everything turns on them and they end up being framed for literally blowing up the Kremlin. Yeah. Which is also just a really bold thing to do in a movie of this scale. Is like you literally bomb.
I mean, that would be bombing the White House. The Kremlin is the Russians' version of a White House.
It's really cool.
Literally. And it's cool how it's brought up in the trailers too for Final Reckoning, where it's kind of fun because now that we're rewatching it, right, we're hearing and reliving everything that Ethan Hunt has done. And I mean, of course, right, we support and we follow Ethan's character, but a lot of the government for the entire process has been like, you've guessed a security briefing, you blew up the Kremlin.
Well, then that's the funny thing.
It's like all of these fun little sequences.
I've heard a lot of critics who will be like, yeah, Ethan goes rogue every time. And they bring that up in the movies too. They're self-aware of it. But it's like, if you think about it in context of the story, what happened in the first Mission Impossible? He was literally tutored by a guy who went rogue, who ended up being a traitor, right?
Yeah, so
it makes
he's going to have
sense why
questions about things.
It makes perfect sense why they would be so sketchy about whether or not Ethan would do the same thing.
Yeah.
Another thing that I really liked in this movie is just, so I mean, if you look at MI3, where it is, the IMF is like a whole agency, right? They have a whole headquarters, they've got tons of employees, but then this movie, they disavow the entire IMF after.
And it's literally like 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, and that plot point ends up feeding into the Rogue Nation, Fallout, and Dead Reckoning, to where there's not this big IMF agency. It's just more, there are scattered teams who do what IMF does. And so I think that plot point was really good and enabling them to still have kind of that, we're on our own rogue type of feeling without having to make them go rogue in every movie.
Yeah. I really like the end. I thought it was really unique and creative. The car vending machine literally is what it felt like. Yeah, no, like I mean, it was like it was a parking garage
thing, but it's like a vending machine.
I thought it was just a cool use of like they didn't have to make it this super exciting dramatic scene. It was just like they're just in a parking garage. Right. And I mean, like, sure, it was like a floating one and like all the cars were moving up and down the lift and everything.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was a unique change of scenery instead of us being like on this world type of scale of like everything's ending. It felt a lot more like this would be where things would
And that's
happen.
The thing too, is like that. So there's that, and then the ending of Fallout, the ending of the first Mission Impossible, the seventh Mission Impossible, that seems to be where the climaxes of movies happen a lot. In these kind of movies, they'll put them in environments that are very unfamiliar with,
and they have scenes. To now and they adapt.
Have to, yeah, right. Because with the first and the seventh, they're on a train. With the sixth, they're on a helicopter, and so it's just very cool to see how they take these unique environments where you wouldn't think a big action sequence would happen, and they do it. They make it work.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, as far as cons go, because I don't have a lot of cons in this movie. I love this movie.
I do
it's
too.
Very well made. I think one of the cons is the villain. He's pretty forgettable.
He doesn't really stand out. Like we just talked about it
with the Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Thank
as
you. He
Owen
was
Davey
he did a really good job at like. We were talking about this too a while back, but Wyatt Russell plays such a good job at being somebody that you kind of like hate, that you feel more connected to the story. Well, I mean, Thunderbolts was different, but like Captain America, Winter Soldier, or Falcon Winter Soldier. Thank you. And like he was just there. He just played a role, and he didn't really feel a lot more threatening. It felt like it was just more Ethan and his team having to now kind of deal with the Russians.
He's not in that many scenes in the movie.
Yeah, so it was just kind of like it was just there.
One thing that is cool though, if you when you rewatch it and you know who the villain is, when they're in the Kremlin,
you see him walk by without even.
You see him show up in little places, like right as they come in, you see him standing there and he walks off camera.
Yeah, which is cool.
And then, but you don't notice that until after you've already seen the movie. You know who the villain is. And then you're like, wait a minute, he was there the whole in the Kremlin the whole time,
which is fun.
And so yeah, that is a fun little thing they threw in there.
Standing by, team leader.
Exactly. But even then, like he's not a bad villain, but he's just not as memorable as some other Mission Impossible villains.
Honestly, the one girl, the one chick who was there just for the diamonds and killed.
Madeline Swan, except not Madeline Swan because that's James Bond. It's I don't remember.
Thank you.
Name is.
Whatever. Same thing, different day. She felt more memorable.
Memorable.
I'm just gonna.
No, she did. I think, but that also might be just because the movie
right at the entrance,
up.
We see her kill Hanaway.
And so that could be it. But she also does a really good job. What's her? I don't remember her name in real life. It's
there.
It's not there. The point is, she does a good job. Another really good addition to this movie is Jeremy Renner.
I do like Jeremy Renner. I mean, this was when he was in his peak too, right? He just showed up in Avengers. He just played Hawkeye.
Right.
And then I think 2 years after this, he did The Bourne.
Yeah, it was pretty close. I think around that.
Was it The Bourne? The
Bourne something. Bourne Legacy, I think so. Legacy. But he makes a good addition because he's not like he's said to be a CIA analyst, but then as you go along the story, you realize
they're like, wait, he's actually a field agent,
an IMF analyst, and as you go along, you realize there's a lot more to his story than
which is kind of
cool. But then Jeremy Renner's just a good actor in general. I think he's a likable actor. He has charisma that makes you gravitate toward him. So it was a good addition. Anything else about this movie that you want to bring up?
Not really. The only thing that I kind of was a little like not bothered by, but they brought up the plot point. I mean, like, yeah, they clear it up later, but it didn't really feel very what's the word that I'm looking for? Clarified. Was when in number 4 they bring up how Jeremy Renner's character was watching over Ethan and his wife, And then he followed Ethan on a run, and then he came back to find the wife and his two buddies were knocked out and dead or missing or whatever it was. I mean, like, yes, we see that, you know, she's still alive in 6, but we don't really get the clarification, or there wasn't really a fixture saying, like, you know, that somebody helped her escape or hide. I mean, you can kind of play your own game of, like, how do you think
but, I mean,
she
that's kind of, I think,
did,
the reason why they brought her back in Fallout is because
I guess that's fair, because the
like
audience was like, oh, the wife is dead.
Yeah.
And then when we see the picture, right when he's in the elevator, everybody's like,
oh boy, we gotta talk about Rogue Nation first. But
fine. Anyway, that's all I have to say about
that's
Rogue
fair.
Protocol.
So then, before we give this movie a rating, we just have to remind you of our scale. I updated mine,
and I forgot
because we got sick of doing the same movies. But as a 1-star, I have Argyle. Argyle is one of the worst movies I've ever watched.
I felt so dude,
and
they're
I know.
disrespecting our boy.
I know, for
this
real.
One, and then Your Majesty's Secret Service of Shitheads, or whatever the hell it was called. You know what I'm talking about? It was the one with him, the guy who plays Jack Reacher.
The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
That was so bad, and I felt so bad because
we'll have another day to bag on how bad Argyle was. But as a 5, I have Tomorrow Never Dies, a very average James Bond film, which I think is, you know, if we're going to talk about spy movies, both those are technically spy movies. So, and then as a 10, I have Top Gun Maverick. I love that movie, and we'll talk about that another day. Evan, very briefly give our audience.
It sadly hasn't changed, and I feel bad. I know
it's the same.
Still, Dial of Destiny, Fast X, and of course Interstellar.
1, 5, and 10.
But, yeah, I had mine updated, and then I was like, oh wait, I don't know.
It's all good. We'll do it. So with that said, let's give.
I think you scored a little bit above me.
I did. I have this movie as a 9 because it's my attachment to the Mission Impossible franchise, but I also think this movie is just very well made, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. You have yours a little bit lower,
8
as an 8.5.
Yeah,
8.5.
I mean, it's comparable. I love this movie. I do, but we go back to the same conversation, right? It's me and Star Wars, you and Mission Impossible. Yeah, and I get that, right? It's just my emotional connection to something that I'm just naturally going to score something higher. And I still love it. But
we all do that. So let's talk about Rogue Nation. So Rogue Nation, 2015. So this was 4 years after Ghost Protocol. Mm-hmm. This movie is really So this is the first movie
where they kind of take the rest of the series.
Pretty much.
This is their this is how the rest of the series is going to look.
Right, up to this movie, every Mission Impossible movie had been directed by a new director, but then along comes Christopher McQuarrie. So Christopher McQuarrie had done rewrites, uncredited rewrites, on Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Mm-hmm. And he had a relationship with Tom Cruise with different movies, like he had worked on Valkyrie, he had worked on Edge of Tomorrow. He directed Jack Reacher.
Yeah.
And so they already had a working relationship. And so he was hired to direct Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and he has directed every Mission Impossible since then, which is crazy to think there's going to be 4 Mission Impossible since then.
Yeah, isn't that weird to think?
Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is the direct sequel to Ghost Protocol, and its story follows Ethan trailing a group of people called the Syndicate. Mm-hmm. Which at first he was very skeptical about. Yeah, which it could be like, it's like similar to kind of almost like not really, but kind of like Bond Spectre. It's kind of like Spectre for Ethan Hunt, but there's a lot of differences. But the idea is it's this organization who's undercover,
anti-IMF
is how they a shadow organization.
View it. Yeah,
right. And so the story follows Ethan Hunt as he's trying to track down the Syndicate and its leader, whose name is Solomon Lane. Mm-hmm. And this movie was honest. It's a crazy good movie. I like it a lot. But the way this movie starts is
perfect.
I think on par with the way Mission Impossible 3 starts. So Mission Impossible 3 starts.
It just goes right into the action.
Yeah, it just kicks you right in there, and it's the biggest stunt of the movie because they had Tom Cruise strapped to the side of a cargo plane.
Yeah.
And he just literally flew him up there. And so everybody knew this stunt was coming, but we didn't know that it was going to be literally the first 5 minutes of the movie. Mm-hmm. But the way the whole opening scene works just throws you right into the action. And it's a very intense and fun opening.
Yeah.
And I think just the banter between Benji, who's having to open the door to the plane to get Ethan on the plane, and then Ethan, who's literally hanging onto the side of the plane.
And then Luther yelling at Benji to do something.
Luther yelling at Benji from Malaysia or somewhere where he's trying to hack a Russian satellite. And then you have Brandt, who's getting upset at Benji.
Trying to monitor children, basically.
And so you just have all these... You have a lot of fun banter, and it makes the opening scene, even though it's intense, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
And it kicks you right into the action. So that's going to be my first pro of this movie. So
mine is right after that. And I really like how, kind of after the whole Secretary of Defense situation goes down, and they're kind of just like, the IMF is basically just clowns running around in masks and BS and stuff like that. And one of my favorite things is how it doesn't follow this. I mean, a lot of the Mission Impossible movies, they're pretty close in a time aspect, right? If you're looking at how the beginning of the movie is to the end, they're pretty close in like a week, month aspect. This one does a whole 9 month or 6 months,
6 months,
6 to 9 month jump, which I think was kind of fun. And then everybody's, they're searching for Ethan, and he's actually in Paris when they thought that he was in Puerto Rico, I think. Mexico.
He was in, I don't remember. Yeah, I think he was in Paris. They thought he was in
They thought
Cuba,
he was in, I think so.
I think Cuba.
But I just thought that it was interesting that they really, just decided hey, we're going to grow a little bit of time between all of this. And I mean, they did a really good job at painting it with, how Luther's doing, how Benji's doing, and everything like that, which was really fun.
And then what happens next is so there's the Burj Khalifa sequence in Ghost Protocol, but then what happens next is the Rogue Nation version of the Burj Khalifa sequence, which is the opera sequence, where Ethan he tricks Benji into thinking he's won tickets to the Vienna Opera. And so Benji comes to help him, or comes thinking he's won tickets to the opera, but Ethan recruits him into helping him with an unsanctioned mission.
Yep.
Which he suspects that Solomon Lane is going to be at the Vienna Opera that night. And so what happens next is one of the coolest sequences in any movie ever. And the idea, is essentially you have Ethan looking for Solomon Lane, but then they discover that the syndicate is trying to assassinate the Prime Minister of Austria during the opera, which the whole scene itself is they take it directly from an older Alfred Hitchcock movie called The Man Who Knew Too Much, where they do essentially the same thing, where it's their attempted political assassination during an opera. But it is done so well in this movie, both the lighting, the cinematography, the way they use the score of the opera to create tension in the movie itself,
to work with the scene.
And it is such a beautiful scene. I love it so much.
Yeah. And that's when, we technically have already met, but we now get reintroduced to Elsa's character, see a little bit more of who she is. And of course, Elsa plays a huge role in the upcoming movies, which is always exciting. Right.
Played by Rebecca Ferguson, Ilsa Faust. She became a big fan favorite for a lot of Mission Impossible fans. And when a certain thing happened in Dead Reckoning, which you won't spoil yet because we're not spoiling that episode yet, but when they did something with her character, people didn't like that. But it was that said, we won't talk about that until next episode. But Ilsa Faust, she was definitely a highlight because she really was able to play someone who felt like they knew what they were doing, like they were competent, but they weren't overbearing, right? I mean, we don't have to talk about all the female characters in Marvel to know exactly how most people write female characters, but Ilsa Faust does it very well. And Rebecca Ferguson plays her very well.
And their on-screen chemistry throughout the rest of the movies, they do really well.
There definitely is. And she just, her character as a whole is just a very cool concept because her character, is an MI6 agent
who's deep undercover in the syndicate.
Exactly. And
but we don't really
the concept is really cool. Of her, someone who's so deep in it, but doesn't want to, has been there long enough and wants to get out because she knows that Solomon Lane doesn't trust her anymore.
Yeah.
And just the way she works in the story is super cool. And especially the way, the mystery of everything, just how throughout the movie, you don't really know if she's 100% on the side of Ethan Hunt.
Because we had a few scenes where we thought that she was, and then she'd be like, oh, I can't go with you, or then she'd leave or disappear, almost betray him.
Particularly the opera scene, right? The whole sequence, we think, oh, she's trying to assassinate the
Prime Minister
as well, just like the other goons that Solomon Lane sent.
Yeah.
And it isn't until much later that we learn that, okay, actually she wasn't. She was just trying to injure him so that other people didn't kill him.
Yeah.
But it's just a very cool concept, and I like the way it turns out.
I really like in that scene too, at the very end, the Prime Minister's car still explodes, which was kind of a cool staple to showing that Solomon Lane and the Syndicate, they're like, we'll still get what we want to done. It was just kind of fun that we get to see, her test of it and everything. But I also really like the character of Solomon Lane. I think that he does a pretty good job at just kind of being weird and creepy. And you're kind of just like, And it does look like he plays someone who seems unhinged. Like he was a spy for a long time, but he just doesn't even have any moral compass anymore because he's killed too many people. Yeah, he just kind of gives up, which I think is fun.
It's a very fun character to watch, and he's played really well by Sean Harris. And the thing about this movie, Rogue Nation, is I think that it is elevated by Fallout. So really, Rogue Nation and Fallout almost act as, really the whole all
Rogue
three of them
Nation
kind of act as a
had
trilogy.
to be there to set up.
But Rogue Nation
Fallout.
did so good it's a great movie on its own. But once you watch Fallout after you watch Rogue Nation, it's so much better. And I really like because this movie doesn't end in the traditional Mission Impossible fashion where he's on a speeding train or he's on a crazy car parking lot thing. Instead, it ends in a very it's like a standoff, right? Ethan is gambling with Benji's life, talking to Solomon Lane and saying, "You need me, and if you don't let Benji go, then you're not going to get what you need."
Yeah,
because the whole idea is that Solomon Lane needs money. He needs a lot of money to be able to be the terrorist that he is.
Yeah,
and so Ethan gets access to that and is the only one with access to that, and he gambles with Benji's life, saying,
I like how you just brought it up. They use that word and they idolize that he's gambling and using his luck a lot during the movie, and they symbolize that very well, and I really like that.
Right, it all comes ahead at the end of the movie where he really actually does gamble.
But then
Solomon Lane is not going to let Benji die if he won't get what he wants.
Yeah. And then, of course, right, we go through it and we see that Tom Cruise actually outsmarts Solomon Lane and traps him. And I thought that was such a great ending. Like,
it really is. And then
it was kind of fun.
That's
You're like,
where
nice.
you really. So one of the most underrated aspects of this movie is the score. The score is really well because it feels like a very traditional spy movie score. And just when the movie ends and you finally see Ethan trap Solomon Lane, the score just becomes so, I don't know what the right word is, but it's just so epic and it's so full, and it just like it gives you goosebumps because it's really cool. They use a lot of horns in it.
It's kind of fun that they use the same symbolism as how Ethan got trapped in the beginning in the smoke, that he did the same thing to just be like, I one up to you.
Overall, I think it's a very well written movie, and a really great addition. Another sequence I really like, Alec Baldwin. So Alec Baldwin plays
I almost forgot.
The director of the CIA in this
awesome.
movie, and he does great. And I love the scene when, the mask scene when they have to. So a key part of the movie, right, is they have this device that what they call a black box. It's like a drive that has what they don't know what is actually on it until after they open it. But in order to open it, they have to have the voice analysis, the handprint of the British Prime Minister. Yeah. And so they have to take him captive in order to get them to open what Solomon Lane wants. And the whole way that scene plays out, just the way Ethan outsmarts everybody, it's just so good. And then at that point when Alec Baldwin, or Hunley is his name in the movie, when Hunley realizes that this is just what the IMF does, that they're part of what they do is outsmart.
You could kind of see that he was just like, he kind of started to believe in it. That of course now shows into Fallout, which is always exciting and fun. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was such a fun little turn because the whole movie is always about him being rogue or whatever, and the CIA,
hence the name Rogue Nation. Not really. The Rogue Nation is actually about the Syndicate.
Oh yeah, but anyway.
So with all these good cons, your good pros, you didn't give this movie a high rating as I did. So what are some of your cons, or what is a con or two that you throw at this movie?
There was a few, like, I don't want to nitpick it because I still really like the movie, but there was a few parts in it, like dialogue wise. Like there was one scene, like right when Benji got kidnapped.
Spoiler alert.
Bum, bum, bum. And it was Ethan, Luther, and Brant all in an underground parking garage. And the way that the camera movement like switched between, like you could tell that it was reshot. Like if you go back through and just watch that scene, I know for a fact that you'd be like, yeah, they reshot that. And like
I like the camera movement in that scene. I mean, that's a personal opinion, but
well, there wasn't camera movement. I'm just saying that it like flipped from like here to like here to like here to like here. It just, and then the dialogue of it, like there was a few random scenes like that I was just like, eh. But also to your discretion, and I understand that this movie, I'm not saying that it wasn't bad. I don't think it was as good as you think it was, but it was a lot more of a staple to set up Fallout and these.
It really
films.
is. It does.
This was a lot more of like, hey, this is how. This was really where they're like, hey, this is our groove.
Mm-hmm.
Ghost Protocol, they kind of tested the waters of like, hey, this is how we're going to try some things. And then Rogue Nation was there like, this is how we like it. This is what we're going to do. Let's follow it on to the next film.
Now, one thing I will say before we jump into the greatest movie of all time, in my opinion, one downside of Rogue Nation is the underwater sequence, I think, wasn't... I mean, I appreciate the stunt work that went into it because Tom Cruise held his breath for 6 minutes underwater.
Crazy.
To do this scene. But there was a lot of CGI, and you can tell.
Yeah, but, I mean, they kind of almost had to.
Well, yeah, I can understand the necessity
It's just hard
of it.
because it was one of those things that he was really doing his best. And
right.
There was a lot of behind the scenes where they would be like, yeah, he'd literally be holding his breath for 3 minutes. There'd be sometimes where it would look like he was about to pass out. And
but it was,
our oxygen jet. I'm done.
Yeah, you're
I'm
good.
just going to.
The point is, he did do a lot of impressive work with that.
Yeah.
It just, because there's so many blended visual effects with, or CGI.
It was really
with,
just tough for them to do in general.
Yeah, and so I appreciate the sequence, but it isn't as good as other Mission Impossible stunts because there was a lot of CGI that was added with it.
Yeah.
With that said, let's give this movie a rating. So I still love this movie, even with that sequence. I give this movie a 9.5. It is very close to a perfect movie for me. But again, part of that is related to my love for this franchise, my love for Tom Cruise as an actor.
Which I do love Tom Cruise. And I have a ton of
respect.
understand
and recognize there's a bias here, but I'm not even ashamed of that. I love this movie. You gave this movie a 7.5, so it's a lot lower than me.
Yeah, and kind of like I mentioned, there was just a few small things. I don't know. I'm pretty tricky to put things into this kind of like higher 8, 9 category. Like they really have to move me to an extent.
Fair enough.
Unless if they're like an emotionally biased film. Like clearly, right? I would put a lot of the Star Wars films in that higher category. Like Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi. Or sorry, Empire Strikes Back. What the hell?
Yeah.
Whoa. That was almost bad.
I get that.
I still really like it, and I love watching it in the sequence of all the movies because it was a fun change of going from Ghost Protocol to Rogue Nation, but it just didn't hold that much towards me as like Ghost Protocol did or Fallout.
That's Fallout. Let's talk about Mission Impossible Fallout. This is my
I think this is both of our
movie.
favorites.
This is not just my favorite Mission Impossible. This is my favorite movie. It's not
my favorite movie, but this is my favorite Mission Impossible.
For
100%.
The peak action filmmaking.
If you were to describe a spy thriller movie, this is the perfect version of like deception, heartfelt, great stunts, good comedy. Like
not only that, but it's like
all around.
This movie, if you're going to film school, if you're looking at getting into the film industry as an action filmmaker, this is what action movies should be. The amount of insane stunt work that went into this and crafting these action sequences is incredible. Mm-hmm. So Mission Impossible Fallout was released in July of 2018. The first Mission Impossible movie to bring back its director by bringing back Christopher McQuarrie. Mm-hmm. And what a incredible decision that was because we got such a great movie. So Mission Impossible Fallout takes place 2 years after Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and it follows Ethan Hunt as he's tracking down the remnants of the Syndicate, who are called the Apostles now. They kind of disbanded when Solomon Lane was captured. They call themselves the Apostles, and they're planning to sell a weapon to a terrorist named John Lark.
Mm-hmm.
And so the movie follows Ethan trying to essentially track down these weapons and track down John Lark. And my oh my, what a great movie we get. So let's just kick us off, Evan.
Right when it starts, right? I mean, we get kind of thrown into, it wasn't the most intense action, right, compared to some of the other openers, but right, we go through and Ethan and Benji and Luther are supposed to be meeting some weird random guy with a weird accent to get plutonium cores, going through the exchange, and then all of a sudden their communications are cut off and Luther's kidnapped, and then they're like, kill them, blah, blah, blah. And then it becomes basically this gun down, and Ethan has to now decide whether I save the plutonium and leave or I save Luther's life, and he chooses Luther, but then he leaves the plutonium, and then it dives into one of my favorite scenes of the entire movie of them going right into the hospital.
Which, that again, that's one thing they did in the TV show. So in the TV show, it's, what do they call it? They have a name for it. I think they call it a mouse trap, but that's what they do in the TV show. There's a whole episode where the idea is they're trying to trick someone just in the same way that they do in this movie, where they're trying to trick someone that they're there, that they got there.
To have them confess and then
to have them confess to something.
Reveal that the plot is fake.
And it's so good the way they do it in this movie.
Yeah,
and then it leads right into
so
the
fun.
opening credits, which are just absolutely baller.
Yeah.
Just have so much firepower. But that is just the standard for this movie, is it takes things that you're like, dang, that's cool, and then it just keeps upping the ante. It makes everything just gets better as it goes along. And right after the credits, we see that, because right after the credits, we get, again, one of the greatest action stunt sequences we've ever seen on film, when Ethan has to halo jump, right? High altitude, low opening jump over Paris to get to a meeting
with Henry Cavill.
To get to a meeting in time where to
meet the White Widow.
To meet the White Widow, played by Vanessa Kirby, who's going to sell the plutonium.
Mm-hmm. They've got to intercept John Lark to meet the Widow.
And the halo jump itself is incredible, because of what Tom Cruise did to get that on camera, is that he actually went and jumped 20,000 feet, right? That's a real jump.
Sure, so cool.
They enhanced the landscape with visual effects.
Yeah,
right, to put
they
Paris
changed a little bit more on how.
And they added some clouds and all that. So they add visual effects, but the actual jump is real. It's 100% real, and it's this long take, it was done in multiple takes, but the way they cut it is it looks like it's just one take. Mm-hmm. But right there, you already have them diving into this huge stunt sequence that leads into something that's even better.
Their fight scene between this, who's probably John Lark, Ethan Hunt, and then Walker.
Right.
And they're all...
That's the thing about this movie, again. So you have the hospital scene, you're like, dang, that's cool how they just tricked. And then you have the jump, and you're like, dang, that's cool. And then you get into the bathroom fight. That is serious. One of the best hand-to-hand combat fights that I have ever seen.
Well, the thing that I love about it is they didn't use any music.
No, they didn't.
I think that was really good, because then you can really imagine and feel like you're there a lot more. They used a lot of the practical aspects of it, like the guy grabbed the faucet. Right. The crashing through the glass.
The sound design really makes up, because that's the thing about score. Sometimes you don't need score, and they pull back on it, and they just use the sound design and just the hitting and the shattering glass and all that, and it just makes it feel so raw and so intense.
It's really well done.
It is. Yeah, and just not only that, but just visually, just this idea. There's three guys in suits in this very white, clean, pristine bathroom, and they just beat the hell out of each other. And then by the end, right, Ilsa shows up. She blows off John Lark's head.
And then
there's blood all over the floor. And
do their regular,
And then, then that's when
they've got to just go through and be like, all right, we got to...
Again, that's a staple of Mission Impossible, where the plan goes wrong, and now they have to improvise.
Thank you.
And so what does Ethan do? He says, I'm just going to pretend to be John Lark. We'll just hope they've never met. Yep. Which is, something they did in Ghost Protocol. But, if it works, don't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. And then, of course, it leads into him meeting the Widow. We meet Vanessa Kirby, which I like Vanessa Kirby as an actress. I think that a role like this fits her, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of supposed to be very pretty, elegant.
Well, not only
crazy.
that, but she does a really good job of playing. So she plays the daughter of Max from the first movie. That's who she's supposed to be. And she does very well of channeling the lady who played Max in the first movie and making it feel like she is her daughter, because that's who she's supposed to be. Now, before we go on, let's talk about Henry Cavill. I know you have a lot of thoughts on Henry Cavill.
I think that this was a perfect opportunity for him to get back in the spotlight. I mean, we've talked about this, right? Henry Cavill has sadly been put through a really rough run.
Argyle.
Ungentlemanly
So
conduct.
Justice
but
League.
it was just so hard, right? After Man of Steel and Justice League, DC was just like, yeah, bye. And then the world was like, actually, we like him. You're stupid. And then the whole Witcher drama. I don't know if you cared about
yeah,
the Witcher.
I've heard. I mean, I've never watched it, but I've heard.
But he did, like, The Witcher. He's such a perfect, like, I mean, he really is a nerd, which is awesome. And that's what I love about him. And he's very openly honest about it. So a role like The Witcher, where he was able to embrace something from this video game and basically just kind of be himself, was great. And then, of course, they decided to get Liam Hemsworth. But this was a perfect role for him.
Right. The thing I think I love about him here is that he's playing a villain. Spoiler alert, he's playing a villain.
But at first, we don't know that, which is kind of, we start to get subtle
You kind of
hints.
know that because it's not really a big plot twist, because they kind of, I mean, they showed it in the trailer pretty much. So
a little bit, but we start to see these subtle hints of, like,
he plays such a powerful and just, like, ruthless villain.
Well, because he's a big dude.
He is. And then he's got
awesome.
the mustache, which, by the way, cost Warner Brothers $20 million.
What?
You haven't heard that story?
No.
So this movie was being shot at the same time they were reshooting Justice League, but he had a mustache that he was contractually obligated to keep for this movie. And so Warner Brothers approached Paramount saying, hey, we need you to shave so that you can research for Superman. And Paramount was like, okay, but it's going to cost you $20 million for the visual
Warner
effects
Brothers
you're
was
going to
like,
have.
okay,
And,
fine.
well, they were like, yeah, but then ultimately they didn't end up even doing it. So he never actually shaved. And then you can see that in the 2017 Justice League, directed by Joss Whedon. You can see the visual effects painted over Henry Cavill's face that look absolutely horrible.
Sounds very
because they had to take out his mustache that he was wearing for this. So it was a very expensive mustache that cost a lot of money in visual effects artists.
Nice.
But it looks great for him. Like, he looks like a villain in this movie.
Yeah, it gives him that.
He literally has
a
a villain
rough
mustache.
Look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest highlights of this movie is absolutely the chemistry and the screen power between Tom Cruise and Henry Cavill. That is just such a
they work so well together that they kind of butt heads in their own way, but then there's so many times through the movie that they both butt heads, but then they're like, fine, we'll just put it aside and just keep going down the line because we both know what we're working towards or whatever it is.
Now, with that said, having talked about up to that point in the movie, this movie has one of the greatest scores I have ever heard. It is so intense. Okay. So one of my favorite scenes of this movie is actually not even one of the big stunts, but as we go along in the story, right, we learn that the White Widow doesn't actually have the plutonium. She's just a broker. Mm-hmm. And so Ethan, who's now acting as John Lark, in order for the apostles to sell that plutonium to John Lark,
he's got to now kidnap Lane.
Solomon Lane out of prison.
Yeah.
Which is what I love that they bring back from Rogue Nation, is bringing back the villain and making him an integral part of the plot. Mm-hmm. But the scene that I love so much is just the build up to the Lane breakout, where it's just the score, it's the truck driving, it's Lane getting off the helicopter, and just the piece of soundtrack there is so good.
I agree with that.
It builds everything up so intensely. And it's just a guy driving. That's all they're doing. It's just cars driving on their way to being ambushed.
Yeah, until finally they ram him into the water.
Right, but the score builds up so well on that part. And then, after that happens, right, Ethan and Walker kind of go plan B. They knock Solomon Lane's truck into the water, and then they go and they're chased throughout Paris on motorcycles. Mm-hmm. And even then, it's just like score. Like, that's all you hear is just the score of the movie for about 10 straight minutes. And it is just absolutely fire. And the
absolute cinema.
Score was done by Lorne Balfe, who, again, he upped his game too in Dead Reckoning, because they both have some very fantastic Fantastic scores.
My other favorite scene is basically during that, right? The whole kind of chase scene and everything, of seeing Ethan basically have to improvise, and then finally almost to the point where he gets caught, falls through the net, and then they all finally meet up. And then Ethan kind of had his suspicions about Walker the entire time. Like that whole sequence I love so much, right? Alex's character's there, or sorry, Hunley's there, everything, and then finally we get the infamous F-bomb from Henry Cavill.
But it's so powerful, and like it works so well.
And I know for a fact that he put a lot of like effort into it. Like you could just tell like he had that kind of hate behind it, that he was really acting. And then that whole scene of everything
you just
going
see
on.
John, his actual turn as him being the real John Lark.
Yeah,
and you see that in that moment that the whole plot is a revenge plot. It's Solomon Lane wants revenge on Ethan Hunt, and
Ethan,
in order to get that, he knows John Lark, and he knows John Lark wants the plutonium, and so the only way that John Lark's going to get the plutonium is by framing Ethan and letting Lane get his revenge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the whole plot comes together, and you see
and then it
how
of course comes into
together.
The final arc, which is
but before we get that, we get an incredible chase scene, or incredible running scene with Ethan, where he's running across the rooftops in London. And again, another incredible piece of soundtrack from Lorne Balfe, when Ethan has to try and catch up to Walker, who's now escaping. And then ultimately you find out that
his wife is alive!
Yeah, his wife is... I mean, we knew his wife was alive, but we find out that his wife is essentially going to be a casualty if Ethan.
And I love that scene of how well it was written, of just, you can feel the chemistry of them just both like, they were kind of just holding back tears and just like, they were stuttering. And like, you could just feel how like, I mean, she did a great job acting, she felt very emotionally like, I know why you're here. I can't say it because her husband was there.
They did a really good job in that scene.
They both just kind of knew. And like, as the audience, right, you can kind of feel like, he didn't want this. He would have never done that. And it was just a very powerful scene. And then it, of course, then follows into the final arc, which is
the greatest action sequence of all time.
I saw this super cool clip of, I forgot who it was, but he was talking to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise was like, yeah, he's like, why don't I just take you on a helicopter ride sometime? And then he just like, it was like a week later, he just was flying him around in a helicopter. Like that's a great portrayal in Fallout, because he took so much time to learn how to fly a helicopter.
So if you haven't seen it yet, the final sequence of Mission Impossible Fallout is where they go to this camp in India, right? And they discover
Malaysia?
It's in India, Kashmir.
India.
And so they go to this camp. They find that there are 2 nuclear bombs there, with the intent that they're going to incinerate a glacier that's going to starve a third of the world's population, right? Because the whole theme of John Lark is that there's
the greater the suffering, the greater the peace.
There's no peace without suffering.
There is no peace without the greater suffering.
Along that theme, his plan is he's going to incinerate this natural glacier that's going to starve a third of the world's population. And so the last action sequence follows Benji and Ilsa and Luther, who are trying to disarm these nuclear devices. But in order to do that, Ethan has to get a trigger that John Lark or Henry Cavill has, and he takes off in a helicopter, and it's just a helicopter chase scene.
It was so fun because it was so creative, because it wasn't like a car where you can kind of just like bump into each other and whatnot. Like the helicopters, you're in the air. They're literally sharp blades that are flying. Like you could just tell that they couldn't get too close because they had to be like, it took a lot more like smarts with it. And I loved it so much.
So there are 2 major stunts here in this scene. The first, when we watch Ethan, or we watch John Lark take off in the helicopter, then there's another
helicopter.
Ethan has
to run to go and try and catch it.
Right, Ethan has to run on this payload that's attached to the bottom of the helicopter.
A bunch of like rocks or something.
And he climbs up the rope. And one of the stunts that is so underappreciated is that he actually fell. Yeah, he actually had to free fall. So that was part of the script, right? Is he caught up there, but then part of his character is he slips, and he actually has to fall down this rope. Obviously he was attached, but he falls from the helicopter back down to this payload.
Yeah.
And it looks incredible on screen because it looks so real. And then obviously the main stunt, which is literally Tom Cruise learned how to fly an actual helicopter.
Just for this.
And he's there. Like, this is Tom Cruise in this helicopter piloting,
and it's really fun because you can hear
and
he's just sitting there like, okay, this is pressure gauging. This is the engine. Like
it
just felt like he was like, okay, I can do this. And he was like, almost,
It's
it felt like he was
learning how to pilot a helicopter, but it looks so good because they literally filmed that, right? They had all these
it wasn't as
rigs.
aggressive because that was clearly be dangerous as shit. But like,
but they had all these camera rigs that are attached to these helicopters, and they're actually, you have Tom Cruise piloting one helicopter, and then you have Henry Cavill just hanging outside of another helicopter with
his big machine gun.
Just shooting at him.
So cool.
It looks incredible. And then again, the score comes into play, and the score just adds to that intensity. Mm-hmm. And so this, I think, is the greatest.
I think we could talk about this for so long. We could. And it, honestly, again, I go back to, if you're a film student, you're looking to go into filmmaking, go watch the behind the scenes here and see how to make an action movie on a big budget, because that's how you do it. And granted, not everybody has Tom Cruise and not everybody has that big of a budget. But if you have those two pieces, there's no reason you shouldn't be doing insane stuff like this that makes an audience feel like it's the first time they've ever been in this situation. Mm-hmm. And man, then it ends up with the helicopters crashing, and then Ethan and Walker have to have their final battle.
Right, they have their
both just crazy
which
hurt.
Even that was the way that they filmed that final hand-to-hand combat scene on, I think it's called Pulpit Rock, which was in, I think it was Iceland, maybe. And they filmed it there, but they had to like fly all their equipment up to that spot because
basically
they couldn't
drop them off, and then now like
right. So it takes place on the edge of this cliff, and it was filmed on location, and it looks incredible. And then the fight is just really intense and brutal, and ultimately Ethan saves the day by getting the detonator, and they stop the
huzzah!
And
then he sees his wife and Elsa and everybody, and then they're like, "Woo, yippee!"
But man, it's so incredible.
It's probably this is my favorite Mission Impossible.
It's absolutely my favorite Mission Impossible,
hands down,
and it's my favorite movie. And like you said, we could talk about this forever, but we don't have that kind of time.
Yeah,
I personally don't even have any cons for this movie. This movie is everything that an action blockbuster should be.
This is exactly what I think of when I think of Mission Impossible. Mm-hmm. Like this is to the scale.
This is where they perfected.
This is what I want.
Right.
Literally.
They built on everything that they had learned from the previous 5 movies, and they just perfected it in this movie.
Yeah, and then it just keeps going from there.
It's so good. Yeah. So with that said, let's give this movie a final rating.
We were both right there. I know that you have a lot more of the emotional attachment, but I think that I was still really
I gave this, I mean, you've seen it before, right? When we do our scales.
Perfect 10.
This is my perfect 10. Yeah. This is my favorite movie.
I gave it, I think I did a 9.5. I don't think it's to that perfect scale just because I don't have as much of an emotional connection to it as Sheldon.
I'll do it.
But wow. I mean, it's just so well done in every area. I can't really find much to complain about.
My recommendation to you is go find the biggest screen you possibly can and watch this movie on it.
I wish that they would have released these.
I wish they would have released it in theaters too. I never got to see this movie in theaters.
What?
I was on a church mission. I never got to see it in theaters. But if they brought this movie back into
I think one of these days we'll rent out the theater just to have this
I would totally do that. I would 100% do that. But, wow. Definitely watch this movie, especially before you go see Final Reckoning, because this is my personal favorite. With that said, our next week is going to be crazy. So we're not only going to review the Final Reckoning, we are going to also review Dead Reckoning Part 1, formerly titled Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Because at first it was Part 1 and Part 2, but I mean, the story continues on, so it's just going to be one bigger story. Like it sounds like that there's not really much of a delay between when the first one ends compared to the second one. Like they kind of just continue on very
So I'm very excited for this movie. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And definitely make sure to tune in.
So
I know, right? It looks incredible.
I'm excited.
So that said, definitely make sure to tune in. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Mission Impossible 4, 5, and 6. And be sure to like and subscribe if you want to keep seeing reviews and spoilers for all of your favorite movies. With that said, we'll catch you next week when we review Dead Reckoning and Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning.